What if I told you that the very thing you have spent your life avoiding, the sharp, disorienting, suffocating reality of pain, is not your enemy, but your greatest ally? That within every heartbreak, every defeat, every wound, there lies the seed of not only survival, but transformation. This is not the shallow promise of pop philosophy or self-help slogans. It is the hard-won insight of the Stoic tradition, which teaches that pain, rightly understood, is the raw material from which true strength is forged. The Stoics knew what we, in our modern aversion to suffering, have largely forgotten: that life is not meant to be painless. It is not structured to deliver us uninterrupted comfort or unbroken happiness. Rather, it is structured to test us, to expose the fragility of our assumptions, to reveal the gaps in our character, and to call us toward growth that we would never choose voluntarily. The core of the Stoic path is this: do not run from pain, confront it, understand it, and use it. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous Stoic emperor, faced war, betrayal, disease, and personal loss. Yet, in the midst of these hardships, he wrote to himself as a kind of reminder: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This simple but profound sentence captures the essence of the Stoic approach to pain, not as an obstacle to be avoided, but as a path to be walked. But before we can turn pain into power, we must first dismantle the common myths that distort our relationship to suffering. The first of these myths is that pain is a sign that something has gone wrong. We are conditioned to believe that a good life is one in which suffering is absent. When pain arrives, as it inevitably does, we interpret it as a malfunction, as evidence that we have failed, or that life has betrayed us. The Stoic sees it differently. Pain is not a detour, it is a feature of the road. It is not a punishment, but a signal. It indicates that we are alive, that we are engaged in the precarious, unpredictable, and often harsh reality of human existence. The question is not how to avoid pain, but how to meet it with dignity, courage, and clarity. The second myth is that pain diminishes us, that it makes us weaker, smaller, broken. This belief is perhaps the most insidious, for it leads us to recoil from suffering, to suppress it, to deny it, and in doing so, to be ruled by it. The Stoic rejects this. Pain does not diminish, it reveals. It lays bare the architecture of our character. It exposes where we have built on sand and where we have laid foundations on rock. It shows us what we cling to unnecessarily, and what, when stripped away, leaves us freer than we ever imagined. Consider the man who loses his job, his status, his sense of professional identity. The common response is devastation, the internal narrative of failure, of worthlessness. But the Stoic steps back and asks, what was I truly attached to? Was it my virtue, my integrity, my reason? Or was it the external symbols of success? If the latter, then this pain is not the destruction of self, but the invitation to build a self on more stable ground. This is the first movement on the Stoic path to turning pain into power, the reorientation of perception. Instead of seeing pain as an attack, we learn to see it as a messenger, as a mirror, as an opportunity. But this shift is not easy. It requires what the Stoics called prohairesis, the disciplined use of reason to govern our internal life regardless of external circumstances. Prohairesis is the faculty that allows us to choose our response to events, to decide whether we will be undone by suffering or whether we will use it to deepen our character. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher who was born into slavery and suffered immense personal hardship, taught that it is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. He insisted that no one can harm our inner self without our consent. Pain, he argued, does not have the inherent power to destroy us. Only our refusal to accept and integrate it can do that. This is not a denial of pain's reality. The Stoics did not advocate for numbness or emotional repression. They felt deeply. They suffered profoundly. But they sought to place their suffering within the larger context of what is within our control and what is not. And this distinction is critical. Most of the suffering we experience is compounded, not by the pain itself, but by our resistance to it. We believe it should not be happening. We believe we cannot survive it. We believe it will define us forever. The Stoic teaches otherwise. What is not within your control is the fact that pain will come. What is within your control is how you interpret it, how you use it, how you allow it to shape your subsequent choices. Thus, turning pain into power begins with the radical act of acceptance. Not resignation, but acceptance. Resignation says, "There is nothing I can do." Acceptance says, "This is what is happening. How will I meet it?" The Stoic chooses to meet pain with reasoned engagement. He asks, "What is this pain asking of me? What is it exposing about my attachments, my assumptions, my fears? How can I use this experience to become stronger, wiser, more virtuous?" This line of inquiry transforms pain from a passive experience to an active engagement. It shifts the posture from victimhood to agency. And in doing so, it begins the alchemical process by which pain is transmuted into power. This alchemy is not metaphysical, it is practical. The person who has suffered rejection and betrayal can, through Stoic reflection, emerge with greater clarity about who they are and what they value, with deeper empathy for the suffering of others, and with a stronger resolve to live according to their principles rather than according to the fluctuating approval of others. The person who has endured loss, of a loved one, of health, of a dream, can emerge with a sharper awareness of life's impermanence, leading them to live with greater presence, gratitude, and urgency. The person who has faced physical pain, chronic illness, or disability can, through disciplined practice, learn to separate their suffering from their identity, to recognize that while their body may be afflicted, their character remains within their power to cultivate. In each case, the same principle applies. Pain does not prevent the pursuit of virtue, it demands it. This insight is the cornerstone of the Stoic path, that virtue, not comfort, not pleasure, not success, is the highest good. Therefore, any experience, including pain, that challenges and refines virtue is not an obstacle but an opportunity. Marcus Aurelius reminds himself repeatedly in his meditations that external events cannot injure the soul unless we allow them to. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. This is not to say that pain does not hurt, but that hurt is not the same as harm. Pain is inevitable. Harm is optional. To internalize this is to step onto the Stoic path, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived practice. It is to begin the work of transforming each experience of suffering into a moment of choice. Will I let this diminish me, or will I use it to grow? The answer to that question determines whether pain becomes a prison or a passage. In the next block, we will explore the specific Stoic disciplines and exercises designed to aid this transformation. The practices by which one strengthens the capacity to endure, to reflect, and ultimately to convert suffering into the substance of character. But for now, it is enough to recognize this. that the first step on the Stoic path to turning pain into power is perceptual. It is the decision to see pain not as an invader, but as a visitor bearing difficult but necessary gifts. It is the decision to lean in rather than to flee. It is the decision to begin. Having understood that the first and most crucial shift on the Stoic path is perceptual, seeing pain not as an adversary but as a catalyst, we now turn to the practical disciplines that enable this transformation. For the Stoic is not content with abstract reflection. Philosophy must translate into practice, into concrete habits of thought and action that progressively reshape the individual from within. Pain, as the Stoics remind us, will come unbidden. Our task is to be prepared, to meet it not with panic or despair, but with composure and clarity. And that preparation consists of daily disciplines designed to fortify the mind, temper the emotions, and hone the virtues required to convert suffering into strength. The first of these disciplines is the premeditation of adversity, premeditatio malorum. This exercise involves deliberately contemplating potential hardships before they occur. It is not, as some might misunderstand, an act of pessimism or an invitation for calamity, but rather a rehearsal of resilience. By imagining in advance the pains we might suffer, the loss of a loved one, financial ruin, betrayal, illness, we strip them of their power to surprise and overwhelm us. We make peace with their possibility, preparing our minds to accept them should they arrive. Seneca, in his letters, advised, "He robs present ills of their power who has perceived their coming beforehand." This anticipatory reflection does not eliminate suffering, but it mitigates its psychological impact, allowing the Stoic to remain grounded even when fortune turns. Through this practice, we begin to see pain as part of the natural order, not as an exceptional violation. We recognize that to suffer is not to be uniquely cursed, but simply to be human. The second discipline is the practice of voluntary discomfort, the deliberate exposure to manageable forms of hardship in order to build endurance and adaptability. Seneca would sleep on the floor, wear rough clothing, and eat coarse food, even while he had access to great luxury. Why? Because he understood that if we become habituated only to comfort, we will be shattered by the first real discomfort that life imposes. Voluntary discomfort inoculates the mind against fragility. It teaches us that we can endure far more than we imagine. It reframes discomfort as a training ground for resilience. Consider the modern person, accustomed to constant convenience, who panics when even minor discomfort arises. The delayed flight, the cold shower, the critical email. The Stoic, by contrast, has trained himself to remain unmoved by such inconveniences, seeing in them an opportunity to strengthen his composure. But this practice extends beyond the physical. It includes intellectual discomfort, the willingness to entertain challenging ideas, and emotional discomfort, the readiness to confront painful truths about oneself and others. By voluntarily engaging with discomfort, we preemptively disarm pain, rendering it less capable of derailing us when it inevitably arrives. The third discipline is the examination of value, asking of every object of attachment, "Is this truly necessary for my flourishing, or have I granted it undue importance?" Pain often arises from the loss of things we mistakenly believe are essential to our well-being: status, wealth, romantic love, professional achievement. The Stoic disciplines himself to interrogate these attachments, to recognize that while such externals may enrich life, they do not constitute its essence. Epictetus taught, When you are attached to something, do not treat it as something that cannot be taken away, but rather as something that is on loan. This mindset reframes loss not as theft, but as the return of what was never truly ours. Through this discipline, we loosen the grip of fear, the fear of losing what we treasure, the fear that gives pain its most devastating power. We learn to love what we have while we have it, and to let it go when it must, without surrendering our equanimity. The fourth discipline is emotional distinction, the capacity to separate automatic emotional reactions from reasoned judgments. The Stoics did not deny that pain produces an initial emotional response: grief, anger, fear. These are natural, instinctive, and inevitable. But the mistake is to allow these initial reactions to govern our actions and our beliefs. The strong mind acknowledges emotion but does not capitulate to it. It asks, is this fear warranted? Is this anger justified? Is this grief proportional? Through this reflective distance, the Stoic transforms emotion from a master into a signal, a source of information to be evaluated, not a command to be obeyed. This discipline allows the individual to experience pain fully without being enslaved by it. It makes possible what might otherwise seem impossible: to suffer without losing composure, to grieve without collapsing into despair, to be wounded without becoming embittered. The fifth discipline is the alignment of action with virtue, regardless of circumstance. Pain tempts us to compromise our principles, to lash out in anger, to seek comfort in vice, to retreat into passivity. But the Stoic commits to acting rightly, even when in pain, perhaps especially then. For it is easy to be just, courageous, and temperate when life is smooth. It is in suffering that the true measure of character is revealed. Marcus Aurelius reminds himself, if it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. This simple directive encapsulates the Stoic posture toward pain. Endure what must be endured, and act as best as you can in every situation. The discipline of consistent, virtuous action transforms pain from a paralyzing force into a proving ground for character. Every painful experience becomes an opportunity to practice and reinforce the virtues that constitute the good life. The sixth and final discipline is the cultivation of amor fati, the love of fate. This is perhaps the most radical Stoic response to pain, not merely to accept it, but to embrace it as necessary, as integral to one's personal development. Nietzsche, inspired by the Stoics, described amor fati as saying, yes to life, with all its suffering, with all its challenges, with all its unpredictability. The Stoic does not merely tolerate pain, he welcomes it as a partner in the pursuit of virtue. He recognizes that many of his most profound strengths, insights, and capacities have been forged precisely through suffering. By cultivating amor fati, the Stoic transcends the reactive stance of lamenting fate. He moves beyond passive acceptance into active affirmation. He sees his pain not as something to be merely endured, but as something to be used, as the raw material for becoming the person he is capable of being. Through these disciplines, premeditation, voluntary discomfort, value examination, emotional distinction, virtuous action, and love of fate, the Stoic systematically converts suffering into strength. He does not deny pain, nor does he glamorize it. He integrates it into his life as a necessary and even welcome component of his development. This approach is profoundly countercultural. In a society that often seeks to minimize or avoid suffering at all costs, the Stoic embraces it, not out of masochism, but out of a clear-eyed recognition that suffering is the crucible of character. In the next block, we will explore how the Stoic, having developed these disciplines, applies them in the face of specific forms of pain, loss, betrayal, physical suffering, and existential anxiety. We will see how the Stoic path offers not only resilience but transformation, not merely the capacity to endure pain, but the power to use it as a catalyst for becoming more than one was before. But for now, it is enough to internalize this, that pain, though inevitable, need not be destructive. That, through disciplined practice, through reasoned reflection, and through courageous engagement, pain can be converted into the very substance of strength. That this, and not the avoidance of suffering, is the true Stoic path to turning pain into power. There are moments in life when pain does not merely knock on the door, it breaks it down. When you are not just bruised, but cracked open. When betrayal shatters your sense of trust. When the loss of someone you love leaves a silence so deep it seems to echo through time. When the body fails, when your dreams dissolve, when everything you counted on is suddenly gone. These are the moments that test the truth of every philosophy. It is one thing to speak of Stoic resilience in abstraction. It is another to apply it when your chest is tight with grief, when your thoughts loop endlessly in sleepless hours, when your voice trembles from the weight of what you've lost. And yet, it is in precisely these moments that the Stoic path proves its worth, for it was not designed for comfort, but for reality. It was built not for sunshine, but for storms. Let us begin with one of the most devastating pains of all: loss. The Stoic perspective on death and loss is radical, not in its denial of grief, but in its insistence that grief be grounded in truth. Epictetus reminds us that when you kiss your child, say to yourself, "You may not come back." This is not meant to create paranoia or emotional detachment. It is meant to foster presence, clarity, and reverence, to love fully while understanding the nature of impermanence. The Stoic mourns, but he does not collapse. He allows sorrow to pass through him, but he does not become its prisoner. He remembers that death is not an injustice but a condition of life, that nothing truly good, virtue, character, courage, can be taken by death. And most importantly, he remembers that the value of what is lost is not diminished by its end. A flower's beauty is not lessened because it withers. Its brevity is what makes it precious. To suffer loss without becoming bitter, to love without becoming enslaved, to grieve without becoming paralyzed. This is the Stoic's art. It is the quiet strength to carry memory with honor, not with agony. Now consider betrayal, the pain of trust broken, of loyalty violated, of finding yourself alone where once you believed you were safe. Betrayal strikes not only at the heart but at identity. It forces us to question our judgment, our discernment, even our sense of reality. And yet, the Stoic does not allow betrayal to unravel him. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by political intrigue and personal treachery, wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, do not let pain deform your character. Let it refine it. When betrayed, the strong mind does not become cynical. It becomes clear. It asks, what false assumptions did I carry into this relationship? Was I seeking something external, validation, identity, control, when I should have remained rooted in virtue? The betrayal becomes a lesson, not about the other person, but about oneself. This self-reflection transforms the pain of betrayal into a deeper self-knowledge. It clarifies boundaries. It deepens discernment. and it fortifies the soul with one of the Stoics' most powerful defenses: indifference to what is not ours to control. Now, some exciting news. Our channel now offers a members club. By joining it, you'll unlock exclusive benefits, deeper content dives, and personal insights. Join us on this journey, and let's build a meaningful life together. And I also humbly ask you to leave a comment, as it helps my channel immensely. If you do not know what to comment, just write "better every day," so I know you reached this far. And don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. Also, I've linked some books on Stoicism that helped me become the man I am today, and will also help you achieve a Stoic mindset. We can never govern the choices of others, but we can govern the principles by which we choose and how we respond when others fall short of them. Let us now face physical pain and illness, the kind that wears down the body, that intrudes upon every movement, every breath. For many, this is the most terrifying pain because it feels relentless, inescapable. It strips away illusions of control. But here again, the Stoics shine. Epictetus himself was crippled, living with a lame leg after being beaten as a slave. And yet, he spoke with serenity. Lameness is an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. The body may be broken. The mind need not be. The Stoic separates the body from the self. He honors the body, cares for it, but does not identify with it. He understands that the essence of who he is resides not in flesh, but in choice, in reason, in the way he bears what must be borne. This internal sovereignty becomes a fortress. While the pain may persist, it does not dictate action. The body may suffer, but the mind retains dignity, and the soul remains unbent. Consider now emotional pain, the kind that does not leave bruises but leaves you hollow. Loneliness, rejection, shame. These are not visible wounds, but they pierce just as deeply. The Stoic does not deny these feelings. He examines them. He asks, "Why do I feel this way? What belief underlies this pain?" Shame, for example, often arises from the belief that we are unworthy because we have failed in the eyes of others. But the Stoic asks, is the opinion of others a true measure of my worth? Or is my worth defined by my character, my effort, my intention? In this way, the Stoic separates the pain from the illusion that gives it power. He does not flee emotion, but he refuses to be tyrannized by it. He also cultivates solitude. He transforms loneliness into reflection. He learns to be his own companion, to enjoy the company of his thoughts, to become his own source of peace. In doing so, he disarms one of the most common fears of the modern world, being alone with oneself. There is one more pain we must address, the existential pain. The dread that arises not from a specific event, but from the sense that life itself may be meaningless, that all effort is futile, that suffering is arbitrary, that death erases all. Here, the Stoic offers no false comfort. Instead, he offers purpose. He reminds us that life is not about what we receive, but about how we respond. That meaning is not found, but made, through action, through discipline, through daily dedication to virtue. He invites us to see life as a test of character, not a puzzle to be solved, but a path to be walked with courage. He shows us that every moment, even the painful ones, is an opportunity to express excellence, not as the world defines it, but as philosophy defines it: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. This shift, seeing pain not as a meaningless torment, but as a summons to character, is the Stoic's deepest power. It allows him to walk through fire without losing his form, to be cut without becoming cruel, to suffer without ceasing to serve. And in doing so, he becomes a living example of what philosophy can offer. He becomes, in his composure, a quiet challenge to the world's obsession with pleasure. In his steadiness, he becomes unsettling to those still ruled by fear. Because when people see someone who has suffered greatly and yet does not radiate bitterness, someone who has endured loss and yet remains kind, someone who has faced agony and still chooses dignity, they are forced to reconsider everything they thought they knew about pain. They are forced to ask, what strength does this person have that I do not? And the answer always is this: clarity, discipline, philosophy, a mind trained not to avoid suffering, but to use it, not to be defined by it, but to define it. The Stoic walks into pain not because he is fearless, but because he knows that fear will not spare him, that pain will come whether he resists it or not. So he chooses to meet it as an ally, as a teacher, as a forge. In the next block, we will explore what happens after the pain, how the Stoic integrates suffering into wisdom, how he uses it to serve others, how he becomes not just resilient, but transformative. We will see how the scars left by suffering can become symbols, not of weakness, but of the quiet power earned through endurance and clarity. But for now, it is enough to remember this: you will suffer. That is the nature of life. But you do not have to suffer in vain. Once the storm has passed, once the anguish has softened, the betrayal lies in the past, and the rawness of loss has begun to dull. What remains? This is the critical juncture in the Stoic path. For it is not enough to survive suffering. The Stoic seeks to be transformed by it, to mine it for insight, to transmute it into clarity, and to use it as fuel for building a life of purpose and strength. Pain endured without reflection becomes little more than trauma. But pain examined, pain placed in the hands of reason, inspected through the lens of virtue, and woven into the architecture of character, becomes wisdom. The Stoic knows this. He does not rush to move past pain, nor does he remain frozen within it. He moves through it deliberately, drawing from it what others are too afraid to see. This is the beginning of integration. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, never denied his struggles. He wrote from the battlefield, from the court, from the silence of a sleepless night. But he always returned to one thing: the refinement of the soul through hardship. What injures the hive, injures the bee, he said, not in despair, but in recognition of how one's suffering and the world's condition are intimately linked. If I suffer, I must grow. If I am harmed, I must use that experience to protect others. The Stoic integrates pain by asking first, what did this experience reveal about me? Pain has a way of stripping away the masks we wear. In the agony of loss or rejection, we see what we were clinging to: status, affection, identity. In the face of humiliation, we see our hunger for approval. In physical suffering, we confront the illusion of invincibility. Each wound is a mirror. It shows us not just what hurt us, but what we believed about ourselves and the world that allowed it to hurt so deeply. The Stoic, unlike the reactive man, does not hide from this mirror. He looks into it fully. He asks, was I building my sense of self on externals? Was I living according to borrowed values? Was I avoiding truths about myself that only pain could uncover? This confrontation is painful in itself, but it is also the foundation of transformation. Only when the false self is stripped away can the true self be strengthened. The next step in integration is to ask, What virtue was this pain inviting me to practice? All pain points to a virtue. Loss calls for acceptance. Injustice calls for patience and courage. Rejection calls for humility and detachment. Shame calls for honesty and integrity. When we trace the pain to the virtue it summons, we turn suffering into a signal, not to flee, but to act rightly. This is how the Stoic rebuilds after suffering, not by constructing walls, but by laying down new principles, not by closing the heart, but by clarifying it, not by making life smaller, but by making character stronger. And then comes the most powerful question: how can what I have learned serve others? This is the stage where pain becomes not just personal, but communal, where the wisdom won through suffering becomes a tool of compassion, of leadership, of example. The Stoic does not wear his scars as trophies, nor does he hide them in shame. He wears them as a language, a way of silently saying, I know what it means to fall, and I know what it takes to rise. This does not mean preaching or moralizing. It means embodying. It means living with such quiet strength that others feel strengthened in your presence. Epictetus, who suffered slavery and disability, did not rail against fate. He taught others how to reclaim their dignity from within. Seneca, who lived under the threat of death by Nero, wrote letters to his friends not in fear, but in guidance. Marcus Aurelius, burdened by the weight of empire and personal loss, did not turn bitter. He turned inward, and then returned with insights that continue to inspire centuries later. This is the Stoic's gift to the world, the ability to suffer without losing clarity, to be broken without becoming destructive, and to rebuild not just for the self, but for the good of others. But let us be clear. This transformation is not a straight path. It is not a moment of enlightenment, but a long, slow burn. Pain lingers. The memory of suffering can revisit the body like a shadow. But even then, the Stoic remains vigilant. He reminds himself daily, what happened, happened for me, not to me. This is not fantasy. It is a deliberate act of reinterpretation. It is the imposition of meaning onto chaos. Not invented meaning, but discovered meaning, uncovered by the work of philosophy. Every morning, the Stoic asks himself, how shall I live today, knowing what I've endured? Will I remain a prisoner of that past? Or will I carry forward its wisdom, its scarred insight, and use it to act more justly, more courageously, more wisely? The man who integrates pain into his character becomes almost untouchable. He is not hardened, he is tempered. Like iron in the fire, he is forged through heat, then cooled into form. He does not fear difficulty, he expects it, and he has practiced his response. He has learned not to flinch when pain returns, because he no longer sees it as an enemy. He sees it as part of the path. A visitor that comes not to punish, but to purify. And so he walks differently. He speaks with less urgency, but more weight. He does not need to prove himself because he knows who he is. He is not reactive because he has seen what impulse leads to. He does not chase peace because he carries it within, and the world notices. Though few can articulate why, they feel it. His presence is not loud, but it is grounding. His strength is not theatrical, but it is unshakable. And what they feel, what unsettles some and inspires others, is this: a human being who has suffered deeply and still chooses love. A human being who has been wounded and still chooses service. A human being who has walked through hell and returned not with vengeance, but with light. This is what it means to walk the Stoic path beyond survival. This is the moment when pain becomes power. Not because the pain is gone, but because it has been mastered, harnessed, reinterpreted, and used. In the next and final block, we will explore what it looks like to live every day from this place of power, to carry pain not as a burden, but as a gift, to live not merely resiliently, but expansively, not merely stoically, but beautifully. But for now, let this truth take root. You are not meant to be spared from pain. You are meant to be shaped by it, refined by it, transformed by it, and through that transformation, you are meant to become a light for others still walking in the dark. What becomes of the man who has walked through suffering, wrestled with pain, and emerged not unscathed, but unshaken? What does it look like to move through the world after having turned pain into power? The answer is simple, but not easy. You become a flame, not a raging wildfire that consumes everything in its path, but a quiet, steady flame that endures wind, darkness, and rain without flickering. And it is this flame, this self-contained, unwavering presence, that the Stoic strives to embody. Not for admiration, not to be feared, but because it is the natural result of a life sculpted by hardship and governed by reason. The Stoic who has integrated pain into virtue no longer fears the unpredictable. He does not require the world to accommodate his expectations. He does not beg for peace because he knows where it lives. It lives within the alignment of his actions and his principles. It lives in the sacred space between impulse and choice. It lives in how he responds, day after day, to the same world that once brought him to his knees. The final phase of the Stoic path is not a destination. It is a way of walking, a rhythm of living, a standard that is upheld even when no one is watching, a kind of internal music that plays quietly beneath the surface, even on the most ordinary days. He no longer performs strength, he simply embodies it. When insulted, he does not retaliate, not because he is weak, but because he sees no value in vengeance. He asks himself, does this injury touch my soul, or merely my pride? And if it is only his pride that is wounded, he lets it go. For what is pride but the craving for others to see us in a particular light? And what is freedom but the indifference to how we are seen, so long as we remain just and clear with ourselves? When temptation arises, to lash out, to lie, to seek comfort instead of truth, he pauses. And in that pause lives everything, the entire discipline of the Stoic life. It is not that temptation vanishes, it is that he no longer believes the illusion it sells. He has tested the promises of pleasure, of status, of avoidance, and found them empty. He has tasted pain and found within it not destruction, but a challenge. And so he chooses the harder road, not for the sake of suffering, but because the harder road is the honest one, the only one that leads him to the person he is meant to be. Each day, he reaffirms his principles, not through grand speeches, but through small choices, how he speaks to a stranger, how he responds to inconvenience, how he carries himself when no one applauds. These are the arenas where power is made visible, not in crisis, but in consistency. He does not seek to be exceptional, he seeks to be aligned. He knows that the greatest strength is not in how loudly he asserts himself, but in how silently he carries his convictions. When others complain, he listens. When others despair, he stands firm. When others manipulate, he stays rooted in truth. And though the world rarely understands such a man, it cannot ignore him. There is something unsettling about one who cannot be swayed by opinion, who cannot be bribed by comfort, who cannot be provoked into pettiness. he becomes, simply by being, a reminder that there is another way to live. This quiet strength often goes unnoticed at first. It does not sparkle. It does not market itself. Others begin to sense something different. Not perfection, but stability. Not charm, but depth. And in this way, the Stoic becomes not just a student of philosophy, but its emissary. When others fall apart, he becomes a refuge. When others rage, he becomes a calm center. When others grasp for control, he releases it and gains freedom. When the world spins in chaos, he walks straight. This is the true turning of pain into power. Not that the pain disappears, but that it becomes compost for virtue. It feeds the roots of character. It fertilizes clarity. And eventually, it produces something beautiful, not in appearance, but in essence. The Stoic does not claim immunity to pain. He claims mastery over his reaction to it. And this mastery is visible in the way he forgives, in the way he speaks with precision, in the way he waits without bitterness, in the way he mourns without collapsing, in the way he endures without needing applause. He becomes the man who can be trusted in storms, the one whose presence makes others feel less afraid, the one whose silence is louder than most men's shouting, the one who, even in defeat, carries something unbroken inside him. That something is not pride. It is not arrogance. It is clarity. It is a clarity forged in fire, tested in the cold, shaped in silence. And it is terrifying to those who have not yet faced their own pain, because to be near such a person is to feel your own excuses begin to unravel, to sense your own avoidance reflected back at you. But it is also deeply inspiring, because it whispers, you could live this way too. This is how a life becomes a form of teaching. This is how pain, fully transformed, becomes not just bearable, but sacred. This is how we become flames, not burning to destroy, but to illuminate. As this journey comes to its end, we must remember, this is not a philosophy of resignation. It is not a life of dull endurance. It is a path of radical transformation. It is the rebellion of taking everything that was meant to break you and turning it into fuel for wisdom. It is the choice again and again to live by reason rather than fear, by virtue rather than comfort, by clarity rather than confusion. The Stoic does not seek to escape pain. He seeks to use it. And in doing so, he becomes more than a survivor. He becomes a force. He becomes someone the world may never fully understand, but will never forget. Now, if any part of this message has been helpful to you, leave us your like and comment, helping the algorithm recommend it to someone who needs it at this time. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. And if you look through the videos we've already uploaded, you're sure to find something to take with you. Have a good day.